Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's free public webinar with TPC Training entitled How to Train Outside the Classroom. We're going to be talking about on-the-job and machine-specific training in the 21st century today, really using modern technologies, modern solutions to the ever-present problem of how do we actually get all the way there with all the skills we need and that are applicable to our jobs, very highly technical jobs around the industry. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm product manager here at TPC Training, and I'm going to walk you through really this webinar is going to be slightly different in the sense that it's going to be a visualization exercise, really to help those out there who might be struggling training your employees, or maybe even getting the people in your own department or even yourself trained on the job. What are some of the best ways to come back to your organization and your company to with some ideas for tools you can use to make it happen a little bit better outside the classroom. So we tend to associate training, right, with what's in the classroom. Sitting down, listening to an expert instructor tell us everything that he or she knows. But really, this is going to be all about what do we do after that? Once we walk out that classroom door, once we walk out of that lab, once we walk out of that computer lab, let's say where we took some computer-based, more formalized training, what do we do next? What are some ways we can do it, especially with our highly technical skills-based jobs at the table? So before we get started on some of these exercises we're going to talk about and some of these visualizations we're going to do, I want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. So what that means is if you missed today's session, or you want to watch back today's session with some of your colleagues, your coworkers, your supervisor, or your employees, you can definitely do so. We're going to be posting the recording of this webinar within about 2 business days of today's webinar date. Also, this webinar now is absolutely live and in the moment. So because of that, I really want to encourage anyone who's here. Welcome to everyone as you're popping in here. Everyone here, you're welcome to interact with me and ask questions. And especially if you see something we're talking about that's a little bit curious to you, or you have more clarifications you'd like, definitely use that Q&A button. So you'll see along the bottom toolbar, you have a few items there. One of them says Q&A. You can click that Q&A button, a window will pop up, and you can start typing away your answers or your questions for me. And we'll be able to answer them at the end of the session. And hopefully we'll have time for a really good amount of Q&A based on what you need. So lastly, I want to let everyone know that if you're looking for the slides and kind of looking back on what we're presenting today, we will have those available in PDF format after this session as well. So before we really dive into the meat and potatoes of talking about training outside the classroom, I'd like to get to know a little bit more about your experiences training outside the classroom in your job. So think about the job you have now, or maybe that you've recently had, and I want you to reflect on a couple questions, poll questions I'm going to launch up on your screen right now. So you should see some two in particular, two questions popping up on your screen. And what you can do is take a look at all the answers and click on any of the answers that apply to you for question number 1, that you can select multiple of them. And then for question number 2, you can just select any one answer that you think is the best answer for you. And then you can submit your poll and it'll come to me live, and then I'll share those results with you after this poll. The first question on this poll is, which of the following ways do you and your employees learn outside the classroom at your particular organization? Are you completing self-guided online learning after you leave the classroom? Are you reading the SOPs and documents in books and binders in the field, let's say? Maybe you're reading those SOPs or documents for how to do the job electronically as well. Are you job shadowing someone? Job shadowing, let's say, that more experienced employee and learning from them how to do the job? Are you using on-the-job training checklists while training? How about conducting documented skills verification sessions? And if you're not quite sure what that means, then maybe you're not doing it at this point. But if you know exactly what we're talking about, go ahead and click there. We're going to dig into that one a little more today. Are you learning tasks in a simulated environment after the classroom is over? Are you watching training videos after the classroom is over? Okay. And then question number 2. How consistent is continued training outside the classroom from one employee to the next at your facility? Is it very inconsistent? Is it fairly inconsistent? Are you just neutral, neither here nor there about it? Is it fairly consistent on how people train outside the classroom from one employee to the next? Or is it very consistent on how training is delivered from one employee to the next? So look, the results are flowing in here. I'll give you just a few more moments to make your selections and hit that submit button. And it looks like the answers are really starting to even out here. Getting a few more. All right, that's good. I think we have a good amount of responses in. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Sorry to those who weren't able to get your answers in on time. We'll make sure to share these results with you now. So we just got some great results coming in, and I'm sharing those with everyone here on the call right now. So what you should see popping up on your screen is a list of how the answers were applied across the people here. So we definitely saw the highest percentage of people were taking that self-guided online training, which we're not really going to cover in today's session because that is, again, more of a getting into a room, getting into a private, quiet space and learning about the material. That is a more formal learning. So we're going to really be focusing on really in the moment on the job kind of learning in this session. But look at this wide variety of different things. So only 60% of you are actually reading documents in binders and books, like in printed format. And just about only 60% of you are reading them in electronic format. So there's a 40% of us gap that don't have those SOPs available to you in those formats, or are just not using them. Job shadowing, definitely really close second behind the self-guided learning there, is following someone around on the job, right? And we're going to talk about that as kind of the baseline for how on-the-job training has happened for, the last decades, if not centuries, of people working, right? Using on-the-job training checklists. What are we talking about here? We're going to dig into that a little bit more, as well as the skills verification sessions, which are closely related to on-the-job training checklists, but they serve a different function. And then simulations, doing a simulated task in a simulated environment. Only 25% of us have been doing that outside the classroom. And then watching training videos. We're all too familiar with some of those cheesy training videos that you can watch where you're watching something in a dramatized format in that video. And so, yeah, 62% of us are watching those videos. And question number 2, this is really, I think, a motivation for why you might be here, right, on this webinar, is we all agree that we're pretty much fairly inconsistent, right? We're across the map in terms of our experiences, but most of us are saying that our training outside the classroom is fairly inconsistent, which means if one employee is job shadowing someone, or let's say watching different videos or doing things themselves out on the floor, then the next employee 6 months later gets hired to do the same job. You're not really sure whether that person's going to get the same type of training and skills and knowledge that the other person got. So really, that's going to be where we really what the motivation is how can we get a consistent training outside the classroom? And that's really going to motivate us into talking today. So thank you all for participating in the poll. And I'll remind everyone here that the Q&A button is here. And there is a chat line as well, but be sure to use that Q&A button as well if you want to weigh in with some of your questions. All right, so I'm going to close the poll. If you see the poll window in front of you, you can go ahead and X that one out, and you should see the presentation underneath, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So really, this is going to be a visualization exercise. So I would like you all to visualize that you are standing right here, right? You are on the job. Let's say this is your first week, your first couple of weeks on the job, and you're standing in front of this machine. And you are now assigned as the machine operator, or better yet, the maintenance or reliability technician for this machine. And it's going to be your job to make sure this machine runs smoothly day in and day out. You just got finished with orientation training, or maybe you just got finished with an official classroom training on, let's say, the basics of pneumatics or hydraulics. This is an extruder machine, so maybe you took an orientation class on how extruders work, right? That kind of thing, right? Maybe you watched back a training video, or you were watching, you're reading some books and binders in the orientation room with the HR person, right? But now you're actually standing here in front of the machine. Taking a look at all the working parts here and stuff that's going on, how comfortable would you feel right now, right? If you were this person, how comfortable would you feel starting up this machine? Right, starting it up so as to not completely damage or significantly injure that machine, right? um, Identify components and how they work, right? So if you can see my cursor here, what about this gauge? What is it actually reading and telling you? Where does this pipe go and why, right? What does this shoot for? What is it called? What are some of these valves we're seeing in and around? What is this cylinder for over here? We're going to talk about later. A bunch of these components here. What are they called? How do they work? And how do they fit into the bigger picture? Um, how about performing a changeover on this machine? We're running through one type of plastic through this machine, and now we have to switch it over to another type of material running through this machine. How do we do that in the best way possible? And okay, this machine's not turning on anymore. How do we fix it if it's broken? Right. So these are some real, obviously, fairly fundamental questions, but I'm sure you can imagine now if you're not sweating already as that maintenance technician or the operator who might be in charge of doing these jobs. I'm sure you are now where you're like, well, how am I going to get this information? How am I going to know? Um, and that's really a reality that a lot of our customers with TPC, they're facing, is that they have to bridge that gap between what they learned in the classroom and what they're going to be doing on the job, right? And be able to continue to get those skills they need for this specific job. Let's say they're standing in front of this machine, and how to do it the right way. So what are some ways we could gain those skills, right? For starting up the machine, for identifying components, right? It's our first week, our first 2 weeks on the job. Well, like we talked about before, we could do some job shadowing. So we could um, follow that experienced operator around and watch as they do all these tasks and show you how it's done, right? Maybe you'll watch this person do the job for 6 months, and then you'll feel comfortable doing it yourself, or um, they'll serve as your mentor kind of thing, right? Or maybe you're digging into, you go over to the operator's desk for this thing and you start looking through some books and binders, reading some SOPs, trying to flip through them. You see the date on it is 2003. Well, is that the latest one? You're not sure, but this is the one that you see here at the table. So this is the one you'll read. Or maybe, just maybe, I'm sure many people here have experienced this. I know I have. Trial by fire, right? You just try it on the job the best you can on some of these tasks, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And obviously on such an expensive piece of equipment like this one, that is a less attractive proposition for any organization to deal with, is that they don't want the operators to go through some of these on the job tasks, because we're dealing with multi-million-dollar equipment in many cases. So but the reality becomes, at least a lot of our customers are sharing with us, that trial by fire is the way that we're learning on the job. All right, welcome to the team. You just got done with orientation. Get to work. Just do the job, and you'll figure it out as you go. How can we evolve from that, right? How can we evolve from trial by fire, from old dusty books and binders laying around that maybe were printed 20 years ago, and job shadowing, in the sense that, oh, we definitely agree that that experienced operator is the best person to show best practices. But how can we make sure that same skill and knowledge is received on the day shift as well as the night shift, right? The night shift where this person doesn't work, or the second shift, or across locations, right? So what if this machine is in Minnesota as well as Florida, right? So we have a experienced operator in Florida, but how do we do the same job in Minnesota for the same job? There's a bunch of inconsistencies that can happen with job shadowing, because this following around the experienced person can take all sorts of different shapes based on these people's schedules, based on how they're feeling that day. There's just a bunch of human interactions that can change with the training. So what are some of the options we might have in the 21st century that kind of bring us to the next evolution of job shadowing, books and binders, trial by fire type of stuff? Well, if you say you walk up to this machine and it's your first day on the job, what if We had technology, right? We have iPads, we have tablets, and we have computers, cell phones, and mobile technology that can access boundless amounts of information and visual and audio experiences for our learning and training immediately. So really the theme of this visualization exercise is to talk about using technology to create, um, to accelerate and enhance the on-the-job learning process. So it's not going to um, create something new necessarily, but it's providing you as a tool to more efficiently figure out what's wrong with this machine and get it fixed and up and running, and or learn all the different working parts on how this machine works and bring you up to speed a lot quicker instead of having to look around and try to figure things out. For instance, let's take one example here. So let's say this it's Tuesday now, right? And you go in front of this machine, and your job now is to start up the machine, right? And so you might say, "Well, I'm not sure how to start up this machine." Well, you can take out your iPad and start watching a video, right? A short video that's specific on this machine, and it shows them starting it up the correct process, the video of the proper machine startup process. This is what we call a micro learning module. Let's say it's a 3-minute long video, and you're watching the step-by-step process, watching the person describe how they are starting up this machine and the steps they're following. And then you can, with the guidance of a mentor, let's say, who helped you watch the video, you can try it yourself, learning all the different working pieces. And there's all sorts of really cool ways you can use what we call micro learning in a virtual environment, which is, or in an electronic environment, which is you can have different little training videos all um, tailored to each machine. So here's extruder number one, and then here's a different video with the slightly different extruder two, and how to start that one up, for instance. Okay, and let's talk about the next phase. So let's say it's Wednesday now, and your job now is to start understanding all the working different components of this machine. So this thing we see circled in red here, that is a certain valve, let's say, that we have to understand. What the heck is that valve, right? And how does it work? Well, what if we were able to pull up that tablet once again, and we could bring up within just a couple clicks or taps of the finger all the component information for that valve, let's say. So, um, the component number, the component description, actually the manufacturer and part number in case you need to replace it, all in kind of one centralized location for troubleshooting and training, but also for on-the-job learning about the machine, right? So now you can either take exactly what you see here, see the label that's on the, let's say, the valve in the field, hopefully, not in all cases, but you can take that and punch it in, search for it immediately instead of having to flip through, let's say, 100 pages of manual or schematic to try to figure that out. You can see an overview, a little pic, an overview video that shows how it works in a little animation. You can look at safety related notes you see here on the little screen. You can look at how to lock out that valve if you need to, or additional resources like this, the manufacturer's spec sheet for that valve. Basically everything, it's kind of a way to organize all the information on this machine instead of being in binders or thrown all around, or you have to Google it, for instance. It can all be in one central secure location. And that's really what technology can offer in the 21st century. So we started it up on Tuesday, right? We were learning about each component and how it works on Wednesday, for instance, just as an example. And this is really showcasing that technology can help make component information readily available. This is for troubleshooting, right? So um, what these kind of platforms can offer, and the TPC Operate platform, for instance, offers, it's separated by what do you call it, event. So whatever operational event you're trying to run on this machine, you click into that event and then you learn about all the components required to make that event happen. Okay, it is Thursday now in the plant, and your job now is to do the changeover on this whole machine. You have to figure out how to change over this machine from one material to another. Well, shoot, this is going to be a detailed process, multi-step. You're obviously going to have to learn how to do this hands-on. But right in your left hand or your right hand is the detailed procedure, the SOP, the detailed changeover procedure in this case, on how to fix and clean out and wash out all the different components on how to do this machine. You can scroll through it, right, and get all the information you need. This really becomes, okay, where do we find the SOP for this changeover otherwise? Okay, there's one in this binder, but it's from 2003. Is that the latest one? I know someone had some issues with this last year. So maybe this extruder has that this process has changed since then. I don't know. Who should I ask? Yada yada. Well, if the company had one centralized location for all the up-to-date information to learn about this machine in one place, it really does wonders for on-the-job learning. This stuff, like the standard operating procedure we see here, the spec sheets for the different components, the schematics for the components, which we're getting to, and for the machine, and some of these training videos, these are all what we call supplemental or support documentation for the on-the-job training. These are the source material that people can go to learn from. That's written down. So the more you have that, the better. And we're going to talk about where we go from here. And the last little task, let's say it's Friday now, and now our job is to fix this machine, right? To let's say the machine's not working, right? And we have to troubleshoot it. So now we brought up and we flipped over to another tab here, and now we are in the schematics for the machine. And this isn't just any schematic, right? We're not just putting in the PDF of the schematics on this machine for you to click and open with a PDF viewer. This is actually schematics made interactive, and this is something that's able to be done in the 21st century, where you see the different components on the schematic, and let's say you click one of these colored icons and you bring up a picture of exactly where that component is and how to find out more information. And let's say you do click on that, you get more information like we talked about before. You can go to that next level of make, manufacturer, model number, how to replace, how to lock out, the manual for this thing, all that kind of stuff, the best practices, the SOPs associated with this thing. So what's really cool is that schematics can be made so much easier to read and to navigate, because you can do the whole, finger squeeze on your iPad to zoom in and out to the schematic. You can't do that in real life. And you can also see all the different color coding on each schematic, which allows you to see which parts, let's say the part colored in red here is the high pressure part of the system. So if you're ever going to tap in or try to troubleshoot this, know that it's at high pressure versus metered flow on the yellow line, for instance, of this hydraulic system, let's say. Then you can flip over to the electrical system with just a click of the mouse on. We click, okay, what is the electrical thing making this happen? You click right over to that. And just if you think about the operators trying to find electrical schematics as well as hydraulic associated with one given operational event on this extruder, you can imagine it would take several minutes, if not hours, or maybe even days in some cases to find that information, where it can be done quicker. This whole troubleshooting piece is really what brings the training back to, if you all are, any of you here are on the in the training industry or the training department, where you're responsible for reporting to the executive team about the values of on-the-job training, just know that this part, the troubleshooting part of training, of on-the-job training, having all this documentation in one place is where the payback comes in to play. And by that, I mean, imagine how much, or maybe you've been told how much it costs the company for each hour of downtime on this machine, right? Let's say this machine pumps through hundreds of pounds of material per minute, or maybe 1,000 pounds an hour, or whatever it might be. You can get a dollar value from that. And man, the customers we've worked with have really given us all sorts of really, you might be shocked, type of values for how much per hour it costs the company for downtime on their machines. Let's say it's $10,000 per hour. Some companies have said $500,000 per hour, or even $1 million per hour if you add up all the machines together. But let's say this machine, let's just say $10,000 per hour, just as an example. So if we were able to save that technician or that operator 15 minutes of that hour, how much money is that? Well, we add it all up. It's about $2,500, let's just say in this example, where if they could get to the schematics they need to figure out what's wrong and get a short list of problem components, if they can narrow down the list of troubleshooting things, do the troubleshooting quickly and easily because they have the skills to do so, and get the machine up and running so they can continue to run that product through for the customer, man, oh man, that just paid itself back for whatever you invested in getting this electronic documentation and this electronic system on board. So software has become cheaper and cheaper every year since 2000, right? Where software is more available than it ever has been before. The internet connectivity is more available than it ever has been before, wirelessly, in fact. And because of that, you can gain access to these schematics anytime you need them. Um, because it's all available in one central location. And what's cool about this is that this is the most up-to-date schematic because the company administers this file. So that, let's say we updated the schematic for this thing, well, we just pull the old schematic out, we put the new schematic in, and then all people across all shifts and all departments are seeing this latest support documentation for learning on this machine. And it doesn't have to be rolled out piecemeal or, across different shifts. It's all there and all in one central location. So really, there's just so much value here that we've seen and our customers have seen in implementing things like this. And this is what we call the support documentation, right? The interactive schematics of the machine for the troubleshooting. So what we saw the SOPs, we're seeing a way to kind of manage all that documentation. But then we have to really finally put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and turn to the other side of the what's the saying there? Put your foot on the other side and start saying, all right, now we're going to use this technology in another capacity in actually administering the training, and telling the trainee, let's say the apprentice, what they need to learn on the job. So you can manage those on the job training checklists that give you the full list of the tasks that are required to make it successful in this job. For instance, this is one that's just called installing a belt driven pulley system, which is just as an example, one of the tasks, let's say, that a technician needs to be able to do. Well, that technician will interface with this, right, and learn all about the different technology that they need to understand, the different tasks they need to know, and use these on the job training checklists to guide their training on the job. So I just want you to kind of reflect against the job shadowing we talked about at the beginning, right? This is different. This is more structured on the job training than what we talk about with job shadowing, where it's kind of free flowing, comes and goes. It will be slower some days and other days, maybe, and then maybe you forget what you were covering, so you cover stuff again. This really helps keep track of the stuff you learned. Um, Sorry about that. The stuff you learned, and the stuff you still need to learn, especially if there's hundreds of different tasks you might be expected to do as part of this job, which we can all agree operators and technicians might do hundreds of different things on any given day. So it's really important to track when that training was completed on the job and how. So this person's learning from these training checklists. They're learning about what they need to be introduced to. They're working with their mentor. They really take control. What the best on-the-job training programs we find is where the learner, the technician, is in control of this checklist, where they see everything they need to learn, and they work with their mentor, that more experienced operator or trainer in that area, to cover what they need to learn over the course of their training. But then at the end of their journey, where they finally feel like they're ready to do it themselves and verify that they can do, let's say, this task themselves, now it's time to put that technician in front of the machine and start doing that task themselves, while the supervisor or the mentor, if given permission to do so, can take the iPad. Now they're standing back and they're watching as this individual does their job on, let's say, this given task that they're ready to be verified for. So they're signing this. Are they wearing the proper PPE? Are they selecting the pulley from the warehouse? Are they inspecting it for nicks, rust, and dirt and grease stains, and so on and so forth, all the way down, with pictures and maybe links to different areas to show what the right way to do it is. So this is kind of an engine for running on the job training. Now, again, this on-the-job training is nothing new, and skills verification, right? And this is what we call this. This is called skills verification, where we actually have a documented yes, no, yes, yes, no kind of inspection or verification form of someone's comfort level on how the technicians can do these tasks, and then they can sign off. You can literally use your finger or a stylus on these things and sign them off on this task. Again, this isn't new. On-the-job training and skills verification has been happening for ages now, right? We always train on the job with someone more experienced than us in the apprenticeship programs. However, what's different about this is really how it can be delivered in such an efficient and centralized format. Because as soon as the supervisor clicks submit on this form, it's immediately logged in a centralized documentation system, what we call a mobile forms system in our case for TPC, where all the forms, let's say all the skills verifications, let's say hundreds of them that need to be completed by, let's say, 20 different operators across 5 different locations, let's just say. Well, now that's a lot of training to manage for just, let's say, one training department. However, if you have one centralized location, you can see and do comparisons across departments, across employees, across different shifts, and see the progress with dashboards and things like that, all on this iPad. So it's really, really, really a way to kind of drive the improvement in efficiency and seamlessness of training. And again, when it comes to payback, if you can get a person onboarded, let's say within 2 months, instead of taking 8 months of just going back and forth and not sure how far along they are, and then you thought they learned something, but then you find out 3 months later that they actually didn't learn that thing, and then they come to you saying, no one ever showed me how to do that. Let's say starting up the machine, no one showed me how to start up this machine. And then the mentor says, yeah, I did. I showed them 3 months ago. And then it's like, well, there's no proof of that. So, and all that kind of just stuff. If anyone's chuckling at that scenario because it's happened to them, I relate with you, because people claiming that they didn't learn something, it can't really happen if it's all been documented, as well as, even more importantly, OSHA, right, can't ever get you in trouble in any sort of way by asking you, where are the records of your training on this machine, to make sure people are safe and up to compliance if they knock on your door from your state or the federal agency for OSHA. And you can show them these on-the-job training and skills verifications that you're completing on a regular basis with your employees. So this becomes super cool, super important as a part of this process. So that is kind of one visualization scenario I wanted to walk you all through, but I want to do another one before we wrap up today. Okay. Now we're in another part of the plant, right? Or let's say we're in a whole different organization and a whole different plant altogether. And now what are we looking at? We're looking at a conveying system, right? We see a bunch of stuff going down this conveyor belt, and there's a bunch of equipment here required to make this happen. And so there's a lot of learning we can do about this fairly complex system with a bunch of different stuff happening, right? For instance, if I'm looking at this red e-stop button here in the foreground of this picture, what is this e-stop, right? What is it powering, and where does it connect to, right? There's a bunch of conduits here. Maybe I can eyeball this and try to follow it back and crawl under this thing and see where all these things connect to. But I need to know what this e-stop is shutting off, because it doesn't seem to be doing anything when I press it, right? So how do I do that? Well, you see this little label. This one thankfully has a little label on it. You take a look, you bring up your iPad, and you see, and you bring up the software, in our case, TPC Operate, you bring it up, you say, all right, push button 1, and boom, it brings up this, right? And you immediately have the information for this e-stop button. And its component application, its verbal description of what it does is when it's pressed, it cuts off electrical current and brings us to the PLC, right? Well, where is that PLC? Well, we come to find out when we look up that in the same system, in just 5 seconds later, we find that the PLC is in this cabinet. But where in this cabinet over here, this electrical cabinet? Well, exactly right here, because the software tells us it's this exact PLC right here. And it's in this CP1 panel, let's say, of this system. So now we know that this push button connects directly to this PLC inside of this panel, for instance. And then we can really start troubleshooting from there. Are they connected to one another? Is that terminal leading to where we think it's leading, for instance? Or is there something wrong with the programming of that PLC, and we can start going in from there, right? And let's say over here, here's another thing, right? This motor over here, what is it responsible for? And what are some of the things required to make this motor run? We know this motor runs, let's say, this conveyor belt down here on the right-hand side, but what's responsible for making that run on the electrical side? What kind of electrical equipment is required to make this thing run? Well, we go up, we see motor, let's say this is motor number 601 or whatever it might be, 1101. And we click on its schematic and we bring up the color-coded interactive schematic for motor 1101, and here it is. And then you follow basically the color-coded lines on your schematic to say, okay, if electrical current's coming in here, this red means at 480 volts AC, for instance, it's coming in here, and fuse 1101. So basically the current's going through fuse 1101, and then it's going through a line filter 1101, and then it's going through drive, our variable frequency drive 1101, and then finally it goes out to the motor. So if this motor is not starting, it could be the motor itself for sure, but there are three things now we can check along the system. And guess what? You put your mouse or your finger over any of these when you're troubleshooting, and it brings up exactly where that's located in your panel. And so that's kind of a way to quickly get the information you need to troubleshoot instead of asking around, waiting till the next shift, not sure what's going on, or vice versa. So this is kind of bits of on-the-job learning, and really, you can hand someone this. This is kind of a dual-sided purpose of a centralized machine-specific training system, and that is you hand someone this tablet, or even on their laptop, or even their phone. In many cases, if you want to give them access on your phone, you can. And you basically say, all right, learn everything you want to learn, you can learn about this machine, or even give them guided exercises to follow as part of their on-the-job training, right, on their checklist, and say, okay, I want you to tell me what is responsible for making motor 1101 run on this machine. And they can go in and they can use all the tools available to them to figure that out quickly. And it's really great for on-the-job learning and skills verification, to use the stuff that's built into this comprehensive system and use it for part of the on-the-job training process. And so there's best practices as far as we're concerned, for sure. And this is kind of just like anything, there are best practices with this, and there are maybe not the best practices for this. So here's an example of having the schematics and all the information for a machine all available for someone just right there at their side when they need it, on their laptop in this case, or a tablet, where they can refer to it at any time they need and use it to learn about that machine right in front of the machine as they do their job, or with on-the-job training with a mentor, where you're working together and learning about the machine in a guided mentorship. But the availability of this support documentation is key. So there is some background work that companies need to do to get themselves ready for this. And the first thing is support documentation. So what are we talking about there? You've already pretty much seen it, but if you can get the most up-to-date schematics for the machine, up-to-date bill of materials, right, of all the components of that machine, which are usually part of those schematics, not always, but usually, all these standard operating procedures that the company has written up for that machine, and they're up to date and ready to go. Then you basically, with those three things, standard operating procedures, best practices, right, schematics, and bill of materials, you can really create a great learning environment to learn specifically on these machines after that person walks out of the classroom, learning about that machine and applying what they learned in the classroom directly on the machine. What's important about this type of learning is it's more informal. So you're not being guided like the self-guided online learning, which it looks like a majority of you are familiar with, where you're taking a single approach to getting the information you need. In this more informal learning, machine-specific learning with technology, you can basically click in to this portal based on whatever you're looking for and still get the same information. For instance, let's say you wanted to learn how that button works, right? Well, you could type in the button's name like we did and get to the information for that button, or you could type a keyword and say e-stop. You're just looking for an e-stop, you're not sure which one it is, and then you bring up kind of a component search and get to the information you need. Or maybe you're going around on the schematics and you found this conveyor belt and you're trying to figure out what stops that conveyor belt, and you click around the schematic, you follow the lines on the schematic, the color-coded lines, and boom, there's the e-stop for this belt, and click here, and then we get to the information on it. Or, so those of you who don't really like looking at schematics, I'm one of them sometimes. Sometimes schematics can be more complicated than, than they give themselves credit for. Maybe we just want to be told in words, right? What needs to be looked at if this operation is trying to happen on this machine? Then they can access kind of the verbal description of each of these things instead of the schematic description. So there's different ways for different learners. That's really an important piece of any on-the-job training, support documentation. It's really important that the software does support the OJT standard approach, and that is introduce the topic or the skill, practice the topic or the skill, and then verify the trainee's ability to perform that topic or skill. Reducing tribal knowledge is a huge factor here. Now, if this is your first time tuning into a TPC webinar, just know that this tribal knowledge concept is something that really comes up regularly. And what do we mean by this? Definitely watch back some of our webinars. This is part of a series of kind of different training topics in the 21st century. And we really dig into this concept of tribal knowledge in some of those on-the-job training focused webinars. So check those out. But really what this means is, you're learning from that experienced operator, right? But they never write anything down. So basically it's passing from verbally through word of mouth. That knowledge is going through word of mouth. So that leaves the company really vulnerable, and your whole department really vulnerable to if that person takes a vacation, or if that person has to take care of a family member, or if that person just decides not to come into work for whatever reason, you're kind of left without that knowledge suddenly. So if there's a way to write down and document that knowledge, I think we all suffer, especially in high-paced manufacturing industries where we just have to get stuff up and running. We sometimes forget to write things down, and that can really be difficult for training departments and training programs to continue giving consistent on-the-job training. So make sure to really sit with those experienced operators and translate what their experiences are on the floor and in the field to something written down that everyone can agree on. Because at the end of the day, for those of us in the learning industry, we know this inside and out. 70% of people's learning really happens on the job, right? So only 10% of what they're learning is actually done in that classroom where they're getting the foundation, the basics. But building that other 90% with that mentor and on the job, just doing it themselves hands-on, is really where that training comes in. But all too often, we don't dedicate 70% of our training resources to that, right? We just say, all right, you're getting paid to do this job anyway, just follow this person around and they're going to show you how to do the job. Dedicating actual resources of the training department into the on-the-job training process to reflect the 70% of learning that's actually happening on the job, just keep that in mind. Really, it might be worth investing more time and effort and money into something that's less formal of a training process to make it more formal and more structured to the point where you actually have a really good on-the-job outside of the classroom training program where that trainee feels like they're getting the skills they need to thrive in your organization. And finally, one more little scenario I'll bring us back to for this conveyor belt system is, remember inside this panel, there's a bunch of stuff here. And let's say if you're trying to figure out what makes that motor run or what makes that e-stop get pressed, you're going to have to take out your electrical meter and start doing some troubleshooting, right? So who here can tell me, oh, how dangerous is it to troubleshoot on a 480 volt system, right? If you touch a live line of 480, what's going to happen? Well, it's not good, right? It can severely injure, if not kill someone with the amount of potential that's being held, even at 480 volts. In fact, anything above 50 volts is considered grounds for the national standard NFPA 70E to require full body electrical protection when you're troubleshooting. So wouldn't it be nice, right? Wouldn't it be nice if you're going to learn that skill of troubleshooting outside of the classroom, wouldn't it be nice to have that kind of a semi-formal experience of doing it in that simulated working environment where you can make your mistakes of getting shocked or something like that, but in the virtual environment, so you know not to make that in real life. So what if, right, we had a simulated environment where you could have a simulated meter and simulated install inside of a cabinet and panel, and you're able to do your testing and to know what values you should be getting in this simulated environment. and you can kind of walk around, you look around, you can basically learn about these electrical installations inside these virtual panels in a safe environment first before jumping into it in the field, especially at such a high stakes topic like electrical. So this is another thing companies can and should consider when it comes to building skills is, yes, you want people to do the work hands-on, but you also want to make sure they're safe. And so giving them an ability to simulate that fully live energized experience, but maybe having just a little bit of that buffer zone of the simulated environment where they can make those mistakes. So that was really the last item I wanted to kind of just help us visualize and what this could look like for someone out on the floor trying to learn these jobs even after they leave the classroom. And with that, really, this learning skills in the virtual simulated environment, that's really everything. So it's time to really answer questions if y'all have any. Again, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that I'm more than happy to answer for you. Check it out. It's called Q&A. You click it, you type an answer, and you can just go ahead and put your questions in there. If you'd like to learn more really about driving learning outside of the classroom, that's really something we also wanted to use this webinar as is TPC training isn't just in the business of doing classes, right? We're actually in the business of overall helping your workforce succeed and drive. And that's really why we try to do these webinars to say, you know what, there's a lot out here from training and learning in a corporate sense. If anyone here has been part of the ATD conference experience, you know that the training and learning industry is just gigantic. There is so many people doing so many different things in the corporate learning space that it just makes your mind just boggle at the amount of possibilities that are out there. Virtual reality, right, is coming very soon, where you can put on these goggles and be able to do these simulated exercises just like you're standing right there in front of the panel. Um, there's all sorts of different ways to get between real life and this virtual environment. So it looks like, there's not too many questions coming in. So I think we can call it a day and really just know that you can call us back at sales@tpctraining.com is our central line for basically any inquiry you have from us. And you can connect with me, you can connect with one of our instructors through that email address, and call us on the phone. You can ask to be connected to any of our training experts here to guide you through this program of learning outside the classroom. Or you can talk to me if you like. Feel free to give us a shout. And thank you so much for being here and learning a little bit more about kind of what it takes to do some of these visualizations of training outside the classroom. And thanks so much. Have a great day.